In this lecture, we will review the rules for numbers in writing. When you look at different style guides, you'll see different rules. So what we're going to be doing in this lecture is basically following the rules that are presented to us in the textbook that we're using in this course. The rules for numbers in the textbook pretty much follow the same rules that the Modern Language Association style guide uses and also the University of Chicago style guide. But there will be a few exceptions. So be careful when you are working with numbers that you follow the specific guidelines for the style guide that you're requested to follow. If you're not requested to follow a style guide, then the rules for numbers in this course will work just fine. All right, so let's start with the first rule. We should use figures for numbers that require more than 2 words to spell out. For example, 153 would require 3 words, therefore we should write it out using a figure, or 4,777. So in other words, looking at it from a different perspective, we should spell out all numbers that are 100 and below. We should also spell out combinations like 200, 3,000, 4 million. And we should combine words and figures when we need to express a large round number like 100 billion, 432 million. An interesting rule for numbers occurs when we have more than one number in a sentence. So for clarity, we should alternate words and figures when one number follows another. For example, 39 fifth graders. 39 normally would be written out because it's only 2 words, but fifth is already another number, so 39 fifth graders would make more sense so that we see the clarity between the 39 and the fifth. Or 2 four-wheel drive vehicles. Here we have the numbers 2 and 4. So for clarity, we use the figure for 2 and we write out 4. Same thing with 5 buckets. Here it makes it even more obvious because it's the same number twice. So writing 5 out once and then using the figure once adds clarity to the sentence. Note, however, that we should not start a sentence with a number that is a figure. We should always spell out numbers that begin sentences. For example, 99 Luftballons were floating in the summer sky. Interesting thing here, though, is if the number starts a sentence and it's more than 2 words, then the rule says we should write it out. We should write out the number, but a better solution would be to rewrite the sentence so that the number doesn't come at the start of the sentence. An exception to that rule, though, is with dates. Sentences may begin with dates using figures. For example, 1989 marked the end of world communism. Another rule for numbers is that we should use figures with time designations and year designations. For example, with AM, PM, BC, AD, BCE, CE. So for example, 10 p.m. or 8:07 a.m., 43 BC. But when we're writing in a sentence where we're not using one of those time designations, we would say 10 in the morning, then we should write out the number 10. Or when we use o'clock, we should also write out the number before o'clock. Another rule is that we should use figures in addresses. 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, we wouldn't write out 1600. Or post office box 1000, we wouldn't write out 1000 even though it's two words. We would use the figure. Or say an office or building number, Hill Hall 227, we wouldn't write out 227, we'd write out the figures 227. Similarly, we should use figures for most dates. For example, April 26, 2010, the 1960s, May 1955. Note that no comma follows the month. When you're using only a month in the year, there's no comma. You do have a comma following the date when it's combined with the month and year, but not by just the month and year by itself. Another place where we use figures are with serials or with page numbers or with chapter numbers. For example, newsletter 63, page 44, chapter 3. In all these cases, we would use figures. Continuing with rules for numbers, we have a different kind of rule regarding figures, and that is the use of Roman numerals instead of Arabic numerals. The Roman numerals should be used as figures to differentiate kings, emperors, and popes with the same names. For example, Henry VIII, we would write with the Roman numeral for the number 8, or Pope John Paul II, we would write with the Roman numeral for 2. Or, for example, some vehicles such as a rocket, the Saturn V rocket, the 5 is written with the Roman numeral 5, or the QE2 written with the Roman numeral 2. And then also we can use the Roman numerals to designate family members with the same name beyond the second generation. Generally, first generation is senior, second generation is junior, and third generation would be, for example, Hank Williams III, using the Roman numeral 3. We also use figures, Arabic figures, to designate local branches of organizations such as BPOE 446, the Elks, or the Communication Workers of America, Local 2001 for a labor union. Another rule for numbers is that we use figures to designate county, state, federal, and interstate highways. For example, County Road 512, US 60, Interstate 64. We also use figures with decimals, degrees, percentages, money, measurements, and proportions, such as 98.6 degrees, the body temperature, or 17 degrees Celsius, or 33%, or $935, 36 inches, or odds of 4 to 1. Another place where we use figures is with game scores, election results, statistics, and items in a series. For example, a score of 50 to 6, or a vote of 321 for to 9 against, or 4 hammers, 7 screwdrivers, and 1,268 nails. Another place where we use figures is in contracts, where we put in parentheses a repetition of the number that is written out, and this is common in contracts and other types of legal or commercial documents. For example, the contract total is $4,400.50, and then in parentheses we repeat that using figures. One final point to make regarding rules for numbers is with the ordinal numbers. In most cases, we should spell out the ordinal numbers. For example, Barack Obama, the 44th President of the United States, is the first African American president. In this sentence, 44th and 1st are both spelled out. Or 5th Congressional District, or 2nd Ward, or 42nd Street, or First National Bank. These are all generally written out. However, if the number is greater than 100, then we should use figures with a designation of the ordinal number after. For example, 151st Street. We use 151 written out as a figure followed by ST. Or the 106th Congressional U.S. Congress, we would write 106 with a figure followed by TH. I guess one of the easiest ways to consider dealing with the rules for numbers is learn when you should always write out the number or spell out the number, and when you should use the Roman numerals. And if either of those sets of rules do not apply, then you just use a figure.